An interview snapshot is a one-page template that helps us synthesize what we're learning from a single customer interview. When we use interview snapshots, it helps make our interviews more actionable. It certainly makes them more referenceable. It makes it a lot easier to find who said what, and to understand things like how often specific opportunities are coming up over time. There's a few key elements that I'm going to quickly walk through. The name and the photo should be fairly obvious. I like to include a memorable key quote at the top of the interview snapshot. This acts as a key to unlock our memory of the conversation. So you want to look for a quote that has a lot of emotion or that's really unique about the participant to help you remember the conversation that you had. Quick facts can be segmenting data, they can be behavioral data. It's really just how do we put this conversation into context. For a B2B company, we might be looking at things like the size of the organization, the role of the person that we talk to. On a B2C company, we might be looking at things like consumption behavior. Are you a power user? Do you use daily? Things like that. Again, we know that different customer segments have different needs, so we're trying to capture the quick facts that helps us put this conversation into the bigger context of who the customer is and what we're learning from them. The heart of the interview snapshot are these three sections: the insights, the opportunities, and the experience map. One of the things that I teach with interviewing is to conduct story-based interviewing, where we're asking participants to tell us a story about their past behavior. What I like about story-based interviewing is it's a fairly easy interviewing technique to learn. It's not easy to do. It takes practice. We have to develop our skill, but it's fairly easy to learn, and it leads to pretty reliable feedback. So if we do a good job of helping the participant remember their story, that's our job as the interviewer, we tend to get pretty reliable feedback about what they actually did. And one of the things I like to have teams do when they're synthesizing what they heard in the story is to draw an experience map that represents that story. This is a really great synthesis activity. It's rare that your participant is going to tell their story in a neat and tidy narrative where they just go from the beginning to the middle to the end. Instead, they're going to wander, they're going to recall facts. And so what you want to do is you want to put that story into a chronological narrative. And drawing an experience map that represents that story can be a nice way to do that. What's also nice about this, not only does it help us with synthesis, it's also going to help us with a recall. So later, when we've forgotten this conversation, we can pull up the interview snapshot, we can look at that drawing and quickly remember the story. Now, another great benefit of stories is opportunities tend to emerge from stories. Opportunities are unmet needs, pain points, and desires. So as we hear a customer's story, where do they have needs that aren't being met? Where are they encountering friction or pain points? Where do they have desires that aren't being satisfied? This is what makes our interviews actionable, because these opportunities are where we can evolve our products and services to better meet our customers' needs. So of course, we want to capture all the opportunities that we're hearing from a single interview. Finally, there's always going to be things that we hear or insights that we have that aren't quite opportunities. They're not necessarily part of our story drawing, but we don't want to forget them. So of course, we want to capture that in the insights column. This distinction between an insight and an opportunity can sometimes be confusing. Remember, an opportunity is an unmet need, an unmet pain point, and an unmet desire. If it's helpful to think about this insights column as just your additional notes, that's fine. One thing that I like to do is to separate sort of facts that I heard in the interview, behaviors, things that the customer did, and my interpretation of them, which might be an insight. So you might want to think about, did I actually observe this? Was this part of their behavior? Was this their story? That's more of a fact. And then what's my interpretation or judgment on that? That's more of an insight. I tend to put both of those in the insight column. In fact, what I like to do is put like fact, what did I observe? What did I hear? And then put an insight, the conclusions I'm drawing from that right below that. Now, it's not always one fact, one insight. You might have fact, 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 and then insight. But again, a good synthesis tip is to distinguish between what specifically happened from your judgment or interpretation of that activity. All right, that's the interview snapshot in a nutshell. If you need additional help, if you look on the bottom of this template, you will find a URL that will lead to far more detail about how to use this template.